Margaret's finger trembled over the 911 button as she watched the young black girl bounce her basketball against the pristine fence. But when the squad car arrived and the woman who stepped out wore a chief's badge and called that little girl baby, everything Margaret thought she knew about power, protection, and prejudice shattered in an instant. Hello, my wonderful family. I can't thank you enough for always being here. Your love and support truly mean everything to me. If you're excited for today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. And guess what? Tomorrow I'll be back with another story just as thrilling. You definitely don't want to miss it. Now, let's jump right in. Margaret Whitmore pressed her face against the cool glass of her kitchen window, her manicured fingers leaving small prints on the surface she'd cleaned just hours before. The pristine suburban street stretched before her like a promise. White picket fences, emerald lawns, and the kind of silence that money could buy. At 62, she had everything she'd ever wanted: the house on Willowbrook Lane, the respect that came with the address, the safety of knowing exactly who belonged and who didn't. But today, something was wrong. The basketball's steady thump-thump-thump against her fence sent jolts of irritation through her chest. She'd invested 30 years in this neighborhood, watched property values climb, seen families come and go. Good families. The right kind of families. And now, her breath fogged the window as she leaned closer. The girl couldn't be more than 11, her bright purple sneakers a splash of color against the pristine sidewalk. She wore a school uniform, navy blazer, white shirt, but her backpack lay forgotten on the grass as she practiced free throws against Margaret's fence. Each bounce seemed to mock the "no solicitors, no ball-playing" sign she'd posted last spring. Where were her parents? Why was she here, in her neighborhood, acting like she owned the place? Margaret's phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Another automated message about the community watch meeting. She'd been a member for 8 years, never missed a session. They talked about property values, about maintaining standards, about keeping their slice of paradise exactly as it should be. Safe. Controlled. Predictable. The girl's humming drifted through her double-paned windows, a tune Margaret didn't recognize, sweet but out of place. Margaret's jaw clenched. She thought of Mrs. Henderson next door, probably trying to nap after her chemotherapy. She thought of the Johnsons across the street, their new baby finally sleeping. This kind of disruption was exactly what they'd moved here to avoid. Her fingers found her phone without conscious thought. 8 miles across town, Chief Diana Brooks stood in her office on the 3rd floor of the Metro Police Department, her reflection caught in the bulletproof glass that separated her from the city she'd sworn to protect. At 41, she commanded respect through competence, not connections. Her badge carried weight earned through 2 decades of proving herself in rooms where she was often the only black face, frequently the only woman. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her desk, illuminating commendations and community service awards that told the story of a career built on excellence. But today, none of it felt like enough. Her radio crackled with routine calls, domestic disturbances, traffic stops, the endless rhythm of a city that never quite settled into peace. She'd learned to read between the lines of dispatcher codes, to hear what wasn't being said. 23 years on the force had taught her that justice was a luxury many couldn't afford, that protection was something you fought for, not something you were born into. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls from the mayor's office. Budget meetings. Community relations. The delicate dance of politics that came with wearing stars instead of stripes. Sometimes she missed the simplicity of patrol work, the clear lines between right and wrong that came with responding to calls instead of preventing them. A framed photo on her desk caught the light, her daughter Zoe grinning gap-toothed in her Westfield Academy uniform, basketball clutched proudly in her small hands. 11 years old and still believing her mom could fix anything, still trusting that the badge meant something pure. Diana had moved heaven and earth to get her into that private school across town where kids learned violin and spoke 3 languages. Where her future could unfold without the weight of zip codes and assumptions. The radio crackled again. All units, we have a suspicious person call, 847 Willowbrook Lane. Diana's blood went cold. That was Zoe's route home from her friend Emma's house. She dropped her off herself that morning, kissed her forehead, told her to be careful. Always be careful. Always be more careful than the other kids had to be. Her hand moved to her service weapon, a habit born from years of knowing that being a police chief's daughter didn't make you invisible to the world's cruelty. If anything, it made you more of a target. What do you think drives someone to see danger where there might just be childhood innocence? Have you ever had a moment where your first impression was completely wrong? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear about a time when assumptions led you astray. The 911 operator's voice was professional, detached. 911, what's your emergency? Margaret's throat felt dry as sandpaper. Through the window, she watched the girl attempt another shot, the ball arcing high before bouncing off the fence with a hollow thunk. There's a suspicious person in my neighborhood. A young girl, maybe 11 or 12. She doesn't belong here. What is she doing that seems suspicious, ma'am? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. She's playing basketball. Against my fence. She's been here for 20 minutes, and I don't recognize her. This is a private neighborhood. Is she damaging property or threatening anyone? Margaret's eyes followed the girl's movements, the careful way she retrieved the ball each time, how she stepped around Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses, the gentle way she hummed while she played. She's disrupting the peace. Making noise. I pay good money to live somewhere safe, and I don't know who she is or why she's here. We'll send an officer to check it out. Can I get your name and address? Margaret Whitmore. 847 Willowbrook Lane. The words felt like a betrayal even as she spoke them, but the fear was stronger than the guilt. This was her neighborhood. Her sanctuary. She had every right to protect it. She ended the call and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The girl had stopped playing and was now sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, pulling a book from her backpack. A book. Margaret squinted, trying to make out the cover. It looked thick, advanced. The kind of book her own granddaughter might struggle with, and Emma was in 7th grade. A squad car rounded the corner, its engine purring quietly without sirens or lights. Margaret felt a flutter of vindication mixed with something that tasted uncomfortably like shame. Officer Martinez stepped out first. She recognized him from the community meetings. Young, earnest, the kind of cop who still believed he could make a difference. But it was the second figure that made Margaret's world tilt off its axis. The woman who emerged from the passenger side moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to command. Her uniform was crisp, pressed, adorned with insignia that caught the afternoon sunlight. Chief's bars gleamed on her collar. She was black, elegant, and carried herself with a kind of authority that made the air itself seem to straighten up and pay attention. Margaret's breath caught. A black police chief? In their district? When had that happened? How had she not known? The girl on the sidewalk looked up from her book, and her face transformed. Pure joy, uncomplicated and radiant, spread across her features like sunrise. Mommy. The word hit Margaret like a physical blow. She watched frozen, as the little girl launched herself into the chief's arms, book forgotten on the pavement. The chief, this woman Margaret had never seen before but who clearly belonged in ways Margaret was only beginning to understand, caught her daughter effortlessly, spinning her once before setting her down with infinite tenderness. "What are you doing here, baby girl?" The chief's voice was warm honey, nothing like the authoritative tone Margaret had expected. "Emma's mom had to leave early for work, so she dropped me off to wait for you. I was practicing my free throws like Coach Williams taught us. Did you see? I made 3 in a row." Margaret's knees went weak. She gripped the windowsill as the full weight of her mistake crashed over her like a tsunami. This wasn't some random child causing trouble. This was a police chief's daughter, waiting to be picked up, practicing basketball and reading a book. A child doing exactly what any child might do, finding a way to pass time in what she clearly considered a safe space. Officer Martinez looked confused, glancing between his chief and the house where the call had originated. Chief Brooks? I thought, we got a call about a suspicious. I know what you got a call about, Martinez. Chief Brooks's voice had shifted, taking on the steel edge that came with rank and bitter experience. Her eyes found Margaret's house, seeming to look directly through the window and into Margaret's soul. Tell me, what exactly did the caller say was suspicious about an 11-year-old reading a book? Margaret's face burned with shame. She wanted to hide, to disappear, to wake up and find this was all a terrible dream. But the chief's gaze held her captive, demanding accountability for the fear that had driven her to see danger in a child's laughter. Mommy, did I do something wrong? The little girl's voice was smaller now, uncertain. She'd picked up her book, clutching it against her chest like a shield. I was careful not to step on the flowers, and I wasn't being too loud, was I? Chief Brooks knelt down, her hands gentle on her daughter's shoulders. No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing. But when she stood, her eyes found Margaret's window again, and this time there was no mistaking the message. But someone did. Have you ever witnessed a moment when prejudice collided with reality? What do you think goes through someone's mind when they realize their assumptions were completely wrong? Drop a comment below. I'm curious about your thoughts on how we can all do better. Margaret's hands shook as she stepped back from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not to her. She grabbed her phone, fingers fumbling as she scrolled through her contacts. Patricia Kellerman. HMA President. Community Pillar. Someone who would understand. Patricia, thank God you answered. Something terrible has happened. Margaret? You sound upset. What's wrong? There was a situation on Willowbrook. I called the police about a girl who was loitering, and it turns out, her voice cracked. Patricia, her mother is the police chief. The chief. Silence stretched across the line. Then Patricia's voice, careful and measured, I see. And what exactly was this girl doing? Playing basketball. Against my fence. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? The words tumbled out in a rush. She was just there, and I didn't recognize her, and you always say we need to be vigilant about maintaining our community standards. Margaret. Patricia's tone had shifted, taking on the diplomatic distance she used during HOA disputes. Did this girl damage anything? Threaten anyone? Well, no, but... was she actually doing anything illegal? Margaret's throat constricted. She was being loud. Disruptive. And I pay $7,000 a year in HMA fees to live somewhere safe and quiet. Margaret, I think you need to be very careful about what you say next. The warning in Patricia's voice hit like ice water. Margaret felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. What do you mean? I mean that if the police chief's daughter was simply playing basketball while waiting for her mother, and you called 911 on her. Patricia paused. That's not a community standards issue, Margaret. That's something else entirely. The line went dead. Outside, Chief Brooks was having her own moment of reckoning. She'd sent Officer Martinez back to the station with a firm but gentle directive to log the call as unfounded, and to make sure the paperwork reflected that no suspicious activity had occurred. Now she stood on the pristine sidewalk of Willowbrook Lane, her daughter's small hand warm in hers, trying to process the familiar sting of prejudice wrapped in the language of safety and property values. Zoe, honey, why don't you get in the car? I'll be right there. But Mom. Car. Now. The command was gentle but non-negotiable. Zoe's eyes were too wise for 11 years old. She'd inherited her mother's intelligence and her grandmother's intuition, and Diana could see the moment her daughter understood exactly what had happened. The way her shoulders squared. The lift of her chin. The same defiance that had carried Diana through 23 years of proving she belonged in rooms where she was unwelcome. "It's because I'm black, isn't it?" The words hung in the afternoon air like a verdict. Diana's heart shattered and swelled simultaneously, pride at her daughter's courage warring with grief that she'd had to learn this lesson so young. "Baby." Diana knelt down, eye level with the child who was her entire world. Some people make assumptions. They see what they expect to see instead of what's actually there. Did you do that when you were little? Diana thought of her own mother, working 3 jobs to keep them in a decent neighborhood. Of the times police had been called on her for walking to school through the wrong streets. Of the careful lessons about being twice as good, 3 times as careful, infinitely more patient than fairness demanded. Sometimes, baby. We all have biases. The difference is whether we're willing to examine them and do better. Zoe nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Are you going to arrest the lady who called?" "No, sweetheart. She didn't break any laws. But she was wrong. Being wrong isn't illegal. Sometimes it's just sad." Back inside 847 Willowbrook Lane, Margaret was spiraling. She'd called Janet Morrison, president of the Neighborhood Watch. Janet had listened in stony silence before suggesting Margaret take some time to think about her motivations. She'd texted her daughter Rebecca, who lived in Seattle with her liberal politics and her mixed-race grandchildren. Rebecca had responded with a single word, "Mom." The disappointment in that one word was devastating. Margaret found herself pacing her pristine living room, past the family photos that told the story of a life carefully curated for respectability. Her late husband, Richard, at the country club. Rebecca's wedding to David, who was Jewish, which had taken some adjustment, but at least he was successful. The grandchildren she saw twice a year, beautiful babies she loved fiercely but somehow always felt the need to explain to her friends. What was wrong with her? The question came from somewhere deep, a place she'd spent decades avoiding. She thought of the girl, Zoe, with her bright purple sneakers and her thick book and her careful way of avoiding the flowers. She thought of the pure joy on that child's face when she'd seen her mother. When was the last time anyone had looked at Margaret that way? When was the last time Margaret had felt that kind of uncomplicated love? The doorbell rang. Margaret froze. Through the frosted glass, she could see a silhouette, tall, authoritative, unmistakably female. Chief Brooks. Here. At her door. Her first instinct was to hide. To pretend she wasn't home. To avoid the confrontation that would force her to look directly at the ugliness of her assumptions. But something, maybe courage, maybe shame, maybe just the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying prejudice like armor for so long, made her walk to the door. Her hand trembled as she turned the lock. What do you think Margaret is feeling right now? Have you ever had to face the uncomfortable truth about your own biases? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our most challenging moments become our most transformative ones. The door opened to reveal Chief Diana Brooks standing on Margaret's welcome mat, a cheerful thing that proclaimed home sweet home in elegant script. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Diana had left Zoe in the car with strict instructions to stay put and finish her math homework. This conversation needed to happen without her daughter witnessing whatever ugliness might emerge. She'd seen too much already. Mrs. Whitmore. Diana's voice was professionally neutral, but Margaret caught the steel underneath. I'm Chief Brooks. I believe we need to talk. Margaret's mouth felt full of cotton. Yes, I suppose we do. Please come in. The word surprised them both. Margaret had intended to keep this conversation on the porch, contained and brief. But something about the chief's presence, the way she carried herself with dignity despite the circumstances, made hiding feel cowardly. Diana stepped across the threshold into a living room that could have been featured in better homes and gardens. Everything was perfect, coordinated, untouched by the messiness of real life. The only signs of humanity were the family photos scattered across the mantel, a life documented in careful poses and matching outfits. Would you like some coffee? Margaret's voice came out smaller than intended. This isn't a social call, Mrs. Whitmore. No. Of course not. I'm sorry, Margaret's hands fluttered helplessly. I don't know what to say. You could start by explaining what exactly my 11-year-old daughter did that required police intervention. The question hit like a physical blow. Margaret sank into her pristine white armchair, suddenly feeling every one of her 62 years. She didn't do anything wrong. No, she didn't. Diana remained standing, her posture military straight. So help me understand why you felt the need to call 911 on a child reading a book. Outside, a lawnmower started up, the Hendersons' yard service, maintaining the neighborhood's picture-perfect facade. The normal sound of suburban life continuing while Margaret's world crumbled felt surreal. I was scared. The admission came out as barely a whisper. Scared? Of what, exactly? Margaret looked up to find Diana's eyes fixed on her, not with the anger she'd expected, but with something harder to bear. Disappointment. The look of someone who'd hoped for better and been let down once again. I don't know, Margaret said, and realized with shocking clarity that it was true. I saw her, and I felt threatened. But she wasn't threatening. She was just there, being a child. And I convinced myself that meant something dangerous. Diana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do you have any idea what it's like to get a call about your child being reported as suspicious? To rush across town wondering if some officer who doesn't know her, doesn't see her humanity, might treat her as a threat instead of a little girl. Margaret's chest constricted. She thought of her own granddaughter, Emma, safe in her Seattle suburb where neighbors brought cookies instead of calling cops. No. I can't imagine. I've been a police officer for 23 years. I've worked every assignment, earned every promotion, done everything right. And in one phone call, you reduced my daughter to a threat that needed to be contained. Diana's voice never rose, but each word landed with devastating precision. I'm sorry. The words felt pathetically inadequate. Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret found herself really looking at Diana for the first time, seeing the exhaustion that came from carrying the weight of representation, the careful way she held herself like armor against the world's assumptions, the love and fear and fierce protection that radiated from every line of her body. Both, Margaret said finally. I'm sorry I felt that way about your daughter. And I'm sorry I acted on it. And yes, I'm sorry I got caught, because now I have to look at how ugly my thinking was. Something shifted in Diana's posture. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps a recognition of honesty. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand something. That little girl you called the police on? She's on the honor roll. She volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. She's learning 3 languages and can beat me at chess. She bakes cookies for our elderly neighbor and shares her lunch with kids who forget theirs. Diana's voice softened slightly. She's everything good in this world, and you saw her as something to fear. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She sounds wonderful. She is. And she deserved better than being treated like a criminal for existing in your neighborhood. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of acknowledgement. Outside, Zoe could be seen through the window, bent over her homework in the car, occasionally looking up toward the house with obvious concern for her mother. What happens now? Margaret asked. That depends on you, Diana replied. You can go back to your life, tell yourself this was all a misunderstanding, and nothing changes. Or you can do the hard work of figuring out why you were scared of a child with a basketball and a book. Margaret looked out at Zoe, this remarkable little girl she'd tried to have removed from her street. The shame was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a spark of possibility she hadn't felt in years. I'd like to do better, she said quietly. Words are easy, Mrs. Whitmore. The question is whether you're willing to do the work when it gets uncomfortable. Before Margaret could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Both women froze. Mom. Zoe's voice filtered through the glass. Is everything okay? You've been in there a long time. Diana's protective instincts flared immediately. Stay in the car, baby. I'll be right out. But Mom, you said 10 minutes and it's been 20. Are you in trouble? Margaret watched the exchange through her window, seeing the worry etched on the young girl's face. Without thinking, she moved toward the door. She can come in. If that's okay with you. Diana's eyes narrowed. I don't think that's. Please. Margaret's voice cracked. I need to apologize to her properly. Face to face. After a long moment, Diana nodded curtly. Zoe, come here. But stay close to me. Zoe bounded up the front steps, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She paused at the threshold, suddenly shy in the face of the woman who had seen her as a threat. Hi, she said quietly, her voice carrying the careful politeness Diana had drilled into her. Always be respectful. Always be better. Never give them a reason. Margaret knelt down, bringing herself to Zoe's eye level. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Mrs. Whitmore. I owe you an apology. Zoe glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Okay. I made a mistake today. A big one. I saw you playing basketball and reading your book, and instead of seeing a smart, wonderful girl, I let my fears make me think you didn't belong here. That was wrong of me, and I'm very sorry. Zoe considered this with the gravity of someone much older. Why were you scared of me? The question, asked with such innocent directness, hit Margaret like a physical blow. She looked up at Diana, searching for guidance, but found only expectation. This was her mess to explain. I was taught to be afraid of people who looked different from me. Not by anyone meaning to be cruel, but by the world around me. Movies and news stories and whispered conversations. And instead of questioning those fears, I let them live in my heart and grow bigger. That's sad, Zoe said matter-of-factly. You missed knowing lots of good people. The simplicity of the observation brought tears to Margaret's eyes. Yes, sweetheart. I did. Diana watched this exchange with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted to shield her daughter from having to be anyone's teaching moment. But another part recognized something genuine in Margaret's remorse. Mom, Zoe said, turning to Diana. Can I tell Mrs. Whitmore about Grandma Rose? Diana's breath caught. She rarely spoke about her mother, the woman who'd raised her with an iron will and endless love after Diana's father died in Vietnam. But something in Zoe's earnest expression made her nod. Grandma Rose was my mom's mom, Zoe explained to Margaret, settling cross-legged on the pristine carpet with the casual comfort of childhood. She died when I was 7, but I remember her really well. She used to clean houses in neighborhoods like this one. Margaret felt a chill of recognition. She'd take the bus every morning at 5 a.m. to go take care of other people's homes. She'd scrub their floors and wash their dishes and make their beds perfect. And some of the ladies she worked for, they'd follow her around the house like they thought she might steal something. Diana's jaw tightened. She'd heard these stories countless times, but they never stopped hurting. But Grandma Rose, she never got angry. She'd just do her work better than anyone else, and she'd bring me cookies that the ladies would give her sometimes. She said some people are afraid because they don't know any better, and it's not their fault they were taught wrong, but it's their choice whether they stay that way. Margaret's hands trembled. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was the best, Zoe said simply. She always said that being afraid of people because of how they look is like being afraid of flowers because they're different colors. It doesn't make sense, and you miss all the beautiful things. The room fell silent except for the tick of Margaret's antique clock. Diana found herself studying the older woman's face, seeing something raw and vulnerable that hadn't been there before. "I had a housekeeper once," Margaret said quietly. "Her name was Estelle. She worked for me for 15 years, and I never really saw her. Not as a whole person with her own dreams and struggles. She had pictures of her grandchildren that she'd show me sometimes, and I'd smile and nod, but I never asked their names. I never asked about their lives." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "When she retired, I gave her a bonus and a nice card, and I thought I was being generous. But I never invited her to sit at my kitchen table. I never offered her a glass of water on hot days. I never treated her like family." "Where is she now?" Diana asked. "I don't know. And that breaks my heart." Margaret looked directly at Zoe. "Your Grandma Rose deserved better from people like me. Estelle deserved better. You deserve better." Zoe reached out and patted Margaret's hand with the unconscious kindness of children. "It's okay, Mrs. Whitmore. You can do better now." "Can I? Is it too late for someone my age to change?" Diana found herself answering before she'd made a conscious decision to engage. "My mother used to say it's never too late to plant a tree. The best time was 20 years ago. The second best time is today." Margaret nodded, something shifting in her expression. Would you both like some cookies? I made snickerdoodles this morning, and they're much too many for one person." Diana hesitated. This felt too easy, too neat. But Zoe was already nodding eagerly, and something in Margaret's face suggested this wasn't about politeness anymore. Have you ever had someone surprise you by showing genuine remorse for their actions? What do you think it takes for real change to happen? Share your thoughts below. I believe we all have the capacity to grow, but it takes courage. Margaret's kitchen was a study in controlled perfection. Marble countertops that gleamed under recessed lighting, copper pots hung in precise order, and a cookie jar shaped like a grandmother's embrace that seemed at odds with the sterile environment. She moved with nervous energy, pulling out plates that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Zoe perched on a bar stool, her legs swinging freely as she surveyed the immaculate space. "Wow, your kitchen is really clean. Do you cook a lot?" "Not as much as I should," Margaret admitted, arranging snickerdoodles on a plate with the precision of a museum curator. "I used to cook all the time when my husband was alive, when Rebecca was little. Big Sunday dinners, birthday cakes from scratch. The works." Diana accepted a cup of coffee, noting how Margaret's hands shook slightly as she poured. "Rebecca is your daughter?" "Yes. She lives in Seattle now with her husband David and their 2 children. Emma's 12, just a year older than Zoe, and little Michael is 8. Margaret's face softened with the unmistakable love of a grandmother. "They're beautiful children. Smart, funny kind. Do you see them often?" Diana asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Margaret's smile faltered. "Not as much as I'd like. Rebecca and we don't always see eye to eye on things. She thinks I'm—" She glanced at Zoe, who was contentedly working her way through a cookie. "She thinks I need to expand my horizons." These are really good," Zoe said, crumbs dotting her school blazer. "My mom makes chocolate chip cookies, but these taste like cinnamon hugs." The description made Margaret laugh, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she'd perfected for social gatherings. "Cinnamon hugs. I love that. That's exactly what my mother used to call them. She taught me this recipe when I was about your age." Diana found herself relaxing despite her better judgment. There was something about watching Margaret with Zoe, the gentle way she offered milk, how she listened to Zoe's chatter about school with genuine interest, that suggested layers beneath the fear and prejudice. "What's your favorite subject in school?" Margaret asked. "Math and reading," Zoe replied without hesitation. "I'm an advanced placement for both. Mom says I get my math brain from my Grandma Rose, She could add up receipts faster than a calculator. And I love stories. I'm reading The Giver right now. It's about a world where everything looks perfect, but nobody really feels anything. Margaret's expression shifted, something uncomfortably familiar flickering in her eyes. That sounds intense for someone your age. I like books that make me think, Zoe said simply. Mom says thinking is how we grow. Your mother's a smart woman. Margaret looked at Diana with something approaching respect. You've raised a remarkable daughter. She is pretty amazing, Diana agreed, warmth flooding her voice. Sometimes I think she's wiser than I am. All children are, in some ways. They see the world before we teach them not to. Margaret's voice carried the weight of regret. I remember when Rebecca was Zoe's age, she befriended everyone. The kid with the thick glasses, the girl who stuttered, the boy whose clothes were too small. She didn't see differences as reasons to stay away. She saw them as reasons to come closer. What changed? Diana asked gently. Margaret was quiet for so long that Diana thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Middle school happened. Other parents happened. I happened. She turned to face them both, tears threatening. There was this girl, Keisha Washington. Beautiful, smart, kind. Rebecca adored her, wanted to have sleepovers, invite her to birthday parties. And I. She stopped, unable to continue. You said no, Diana finished, her voice carefully neutral. I made excuses. Our house was too small for extra guests. Rebecca had too much homework. We were too busy. 1,000 little lies that added up to one big truth. I was uncomfortable having a black child in my home. The confession came out like poison being drawn from a wound. Rebecca knew. She was 12 years old, and she knew exactly what I was doing. Zoe had stopped eating, her young face serious as she processed this revelation. Did Rebecca stop being friends with Keisha? No. She became even closer to her. She'd spend time at Keisha's house after school, go to her church functions, have dinner with her family. And slowly, I watched my daughter pull away from me. Not just physically, but emotionally. She started seeing me differently, and I couldn't blame her. Is that why you don't see your grandchildren very much? Zoe asked with the devastating directness of childhood. Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely now. Rebecca married a wonderful man, David is Jewish, and I had to examine my biases about that too. Their children are being raised to celebrate differences, to see diversity as strength. And I. She looked around her perfect kitchen, her perfect house, her perfect but lonely life. I became exactly what Rebecca was afraid I'd become. Isolated. Judgmental. Safe in my little bubble where everything looked like me. Diana found herself reaching across the counter, her hand covering Margaret's. It doesn't have to stay that way. Doesn't it? I'm 62 years old, Diana. I've spent decades building walls. How do I tear them down now? One brick at a time, Zoe said solemnly, then brightened. Hey, maybe you could call Rebecca. Tell her about meeting us. I bet she'd be proud that you're trying to do better. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret looked at this remarkable little girl who had somehow managed to see past her mistakes to her potential for redemption. You think she'd want to hear from me? Moms always want to hear from their moms, Zoe said with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own mother's love. Even when they're frustrated with them. Margaret looked at Diana. Is she always this wise? Unfortunately for me, yes. Makes it very hard to win arguments. For the first time since they'd met, all three women laughed together, a sound that filled the sterile kitchen with warmth and possibility. What do you think about second chances? Have you ever seen someone genuinely work to overcome their prejudices? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most unlikely connections become the most meaningful ones. The moment shattered like crystal hitting concrete. Margaret's phone buzzed against the marble counter, its sharp vibration cutting through the warm laughter that had filled her kitchen. She glanced at the screen and her face went ashen. Patricia Kellerman, HMA president, flashed across the display. "I should probably take this," Margaret said, her voice already shifting back to the careful tone Diana recognized from their first encounter. "It'll just be a moment." She stepped into the adjoining living room, but the open floor plan meant her conversation carried clearly back to the kitchen. "Patricia, hello? Yes, I know there was an incident." "No, everything's fine now." "What do you mean, complaints?" Diana's protective instincts went on high alert. She could hear the change in Margaret's breathing, the tension creeping back into her voice. Beside her, Zoe continued eating her cookie, but Diana noticed her daughter's shoulders had tensed too. Children always knew when the adult world was about to intrude on their safety. "I don't understand," Margaret's voice carried from the other room. "Who's been calling?" "Mrs. Chen saw what?" "No, that's not Patricia, you don't understand the situation." Diana stood up, her cop instincts telling her this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. Through the archway, she could see Margaret pacing, one hand pressed to her forehead in the universal gesture of someone receiving bad news. "The board is concerned about what, exactly?" "A police presence reflects poorly on property values?" "Patricia, that's—" Margaret's voice cut off abruptly. Even from the kitchen, Diana could hear the sharp intake of breath, the moment when whatever Patricia was saying hit its mark. "No," Margaret said, her voice smaller now. "No, I understand perfectly." The silence stretched so long that Diana was about to check on her when Margaret's voice returned, but something fundamental had changed. The warmth was gone. The vulnerability had been locked away. When she spoke again, she sounded like the woman who had called 911 on an 11-year-old girl. "Of course. The community standards. I understand. Yes, I'll handle it. No, there won't be any more incidents." The call ended, and Margaret stood in the doorway between the living room and kitchen like someone straddling two worlds. Her face had transformed. The open, regretful woman who had shared cookies and stories was gone, replaced by someone armored in social expectations and property values. "I think," Margaret said carefully, not quite meeting Diana's eyes, "it would be best if you both left now." The words hit like a slap. Zoe's face crumpled in confusion. "But we were having such a nice time. Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Diana said quickly, though her own voice was tight with controlled fury. "You didn't do anything wrong." She fixed Margaret with a stare that could have melted steel. "Did you, Mrs. Whitmore?" Margaret's hands twisted together, betraying the war raging inside her. "The neighbors, they saw the police car. They're asking questions. The HMA president is concerned about the image." "The image of what, exactly?" Diana's voice was dangerously quiet. "You know what," Margaret whispered, and the shame in her voice made it worse, not better. Because she knew. She understood exactly what she was doing, and she was choosing it anyway. "Mom." Zoe's voice was small, uncertain. "What's happening?" Diana felt the familiar rage rising, not the hot anger of the moment, but the cold, bone-deep fury that came from a lifetime of being reduced to a threat that needed managing. She'd let her guard down. She'd allowed herself to believe that connection was possible, that understanding could bridge the gaps that fear had carved. She'd been a fool. "What's happening, baby, is that Mrs. Whitmore has to make a choice. And she's choosing her neighbor's comfort over doing what's right." "That's not fair," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Diana stood up, her professional composure sliding back into place like armor. "You invited us in. You shared your story. You apologized to my daughter. And the moment your social circle applies pressure, you fold like a house of cards. You don't understand the position I'm in." "I understand perfectly." Diana's voice cut like a blade. I've been understanding it my whole life. You're willing to feel bad about your prejudice as long as it doesn't cost you anything. But the moment it threatens your standing with people whose approval you value more than basic human decency, you choose them. Zoe slid off the bar stool, her book clutched against her chest. Mrs. Whitmore, I thought you liked us. The simple statement broke something in Margaret's face. I do like you, sweetheart. I like you both very much. Then why are you asking us to leave? Zoe's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I thought we were becoming friends. Margaret looked at this remarkable child, this girl she'd called the police on just hours ago, who had somehow found it in her heart to offer friendship, and Diana watched something die in her expression. Because friendship isn't enough, Margaret said, and Diana heard the defeat in her voice. I'm sorry, Zoe. I'm sorry, Diana. But I have to live here. This is my world, and I can't change it. You mean you won't change it, Diana corrected. There's a difference. She took Zoe's hand, noting how her daughter's small fingers trembled. Come on, baby. We're leaving. But Mom. Now. As they reached the front door, Zoe turned back one last time. Mrs. Whitmore? I'll still pray for you. Grandma Rose taught me that some people are just scared, and scared people need extra love. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Margaret alone in her perfect house with the taste of cinnamon cookies and the bitter understanding that some choices, once made, couldn't be undone. Outside, Diana buckled Zoe into the car with hands that shook with suppressed rage and grief. In the rearview mirror, she could see Margaret's silhouette in the window, watching them drive away. Have you ever seen someone choose conformity over courage? What do you think it takes to stand up to social pressure when doing the right thing might cost us something? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our biggest tests come not from strangers, but from the people whose approval we think we need. The house felt different after they left. Bigger. Emptier. The silence that Margaret had once treasured now pressed against her like a weight, heavy with the echo of Zoe's words. I thought we were becoming friends. Margaret moved through her evening routine like a sleepwalker. She washed the cookie plates with mechanical precision, each dish a reminder of the warmth that had briefly filled her kitchen. She wiped down counters that were already spotless, straightened throw pillows that hadn't been disturbed, watered plants that didn't need water. Anything to avoid thinking about the look in Diana's eyes when she'd chosen her neighbor's approval over her newfound conscience. Her phone rang twice. Patricia Kellerman, probably calling to ensure she'd handled the situation appropriately. Margaret let it go to voicemail. She couldn't face Patricia's satisfied tone, couldn't stomach being congratulated for choosing cowardice. The grandfather clock in her hallway chimed 9 times. In Seattle, it would be 6 o'clock. Rebecca would be making dinner, helping Emma and Michael with homework, living the life of connection and purpose that Margaret had traded away for the safety of social acceptability. Before she could lose her nerve, Margaret picked up her phone. It rang 3 times before Rebecca's voice, warm but cautious, filled the line. Mom? Is everything okay? You never call this late. Margaret's throat closed around the words she needed to say. How could she explain the events of this day? How could she make her daughter understand that she'd glimpsed the possibility of redemption, only to throw it away when it became inconvenient? Mom? Are you there? I'm here, sweetheart. I wanted to hear your voice. A pause. Margaret could picture Rebecca in her Seattle kitchen, probably stirring something on the stove while keeping one eye on her children. Living a life of beautiful chaos that Margaret had never allowed herself to embrace. What's going on? Rebecca's voice had shifted to the gentle tone she used when she suspected her mother was struggling. You sound upset. Do you remember Keisha Washington? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret heard Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, the clatter of what might have been a wooden spoon being set down too quickly. Mom, why are you asking about Keisha? Because I need you to know that I remember her too. I remember how much you loved her, and I remember how I How I failed both of you." Rebecca was quiet for so long that Margaret wondered if the call had dropped. When her daughter finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. What brought this on? Margaret told her everything. The girl with the basketball, the phone call to 911, the moment when Chief Brooks emerged from that squad car and her world shifted on its axis. She told her about Zoe's wisdom and kindness, about the cookies and laughter, about the moment when connection seemed possible. And she told her about Patricia's call, about the choice she'd made, about watching Diana and Zoe drive away knowing she betrayed something precious. When she finished, the silence stretched between them across 3,000 miles. "Oh, Mom," Rebecca said finally, and Margaret heard tears in her voice. "What have you done?" "I've been a coward. Again." "No, that's not, Mom. You invited them in. You apologized. You shared cookies with them. That took courage. And then I threw it all away the moment it became difficult." Another pause. "Then, it's not too late. Isn't it? I asked them to leave. I chose the HOA and the neighbors and everything comfortable over doing what's right. How do you come back from that?" "The same way you started," Rebecca said firmly. "One choice at a time. Mom, you called me tonight. You told me about Keisha. That's something you've never done before. That's growth." Margaret walked to her living room window, looking out at Willowbrook Lane. The street looked exactly as it had that morning, pristine, perfect, and utterly sterile. But now she knew what was missing. Not just diversity of faces, but diversity of experiences, of stories, of the beautiful messiness that came with letting people in. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "Maybe you start by figuring out what you want your world to look like," Rebecca suggested. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life in that beautiful house, surrounded by people who think exactly like you do, never challenged, never growing, never really living?" Margaret thought of Diana's fierce love for her daughter, of Zoe's innocent wisdom, of the way laughter had transformed her sterile kitchen into something that felt like home. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want that anymore." "Then what are you going to do about it?" The question settled in Margaret's chest like a seed waiting for the right conditions to grow. She thought of her granddaughter Emma, growing up in a world where differences were celebrated rather than feared. She thought of little Michael, who would never have to question whether his mixed heritage made him less worthy of belonging. She thought of the woman she could be if she chose courage over comfort. "I'm going to call Chief Brooks," she said, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I'm going to apologize properly. And then I'm going to figure out how to do better." "Mom." Rebecca's voice was soft with something Margaret hadn't heard in years. Pride. "I'm proud of you." The words hit like a physical embrace. Margaret hadn't realized how desperately she'd needed to hear them until they filled the empty spaces in her heart. "I love you, sweetheart. Give Emma and Michael my love too. And tell them Grandma's learning to be better." After she hung up, Margaret sat in her living room for a long time, phone in her hands, gathering courage for the hardest call she'd ever made. Outside, her perfect neighborhood slept peacefully, unchanged by the revolution happening in one woman's heart. But revolutions, Margaret was beginning to understand, started with a single person deciding that the status quo was no longer acceptable. It was time to choose. The police station at 8 in the morning buzzed with the controlled chaos of shift changes and coffee-fueled determination. Diana sat at her desk, reviewing incident reports and trying to focus on budget allocations, but her mind kept drifting to the events of the previous day. She'd spent the evening reassuring Zoe that Margaret's rejection wasn't a reflection of their worth, that some people simply weren't ready to change, no matter how much they claimed to want to. Her daughter had listened with the solemn attention of someone far too young to have to process such lessons. Chief Brooks. Officer Martinez knocked on her door frame. "There's a Margaret Whitmore here to see you. She says it's personal." Diana's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Send her up." Margaret appeared in the doorway 5 minutes later, clutching a small gift bag and looking like she hadn't slept. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup minimal, and she wore jeans instead of her typical coordinated outfit. She looked, Diana realized, more human than she had the day before. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your time," Margaret began, her voice shaky but determined. "But I need to say some things, and I need you to hear them." Diana gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I'm listening." Margaret sat down, setting the gift bag carefully on the floor. "I called Rebecca last night. My daughter. I told her everything, about yesterday, about the choices I made, about the woman I've become." She took a shuddering breath. "And then I called the HMWA president back." Diana waited, her expression neutral but alert. "I told Patricia that if the board had a problem with me befriending my neighbors, all of my neighbors, they could find themselves a new member. I withdrew from the Community Watch program. And I put my house on the market this morning." The last statement hit Diana like a physical blow. "You're moving." "To Seattle. To be closer to Rebecca and the grandchildren I barely know because I was too afraid to examine my own prejudices." Margaret's voice grew stronger. "But first, I need to make something right." She reached into the gift bag and pulled out a familiar thick book. "Zoe left this in my kitchen yesterday. The Giver. I stayed up all night reading it." Diana recognized the worn cover, remembering the philosophical discussions she and Zoe had about Lois Lowry's dystopian world where sameness was valued over truth, comfort over connection. "It's about a community that chooses safety over feeling, conformity over growth," Margaret continued. "And I realize that's exactly what I've been doing my whole life. Building a perfect world that isn't really living at all." She stood up, moving to Diana's window that overlooked the city. "I want to do something for you and Zoe. Something meaningful. But I need to know if you can forgive me first." Diana studied this woman who had undergone such a transformation in less than 24 hours. The cynical part of her, the part that had been disappointed by people's capacity for change too many times, wanted to be cautious. But the mother in her recognized genuine remorse when she saw it. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Margaret. It's something you choose to give or receive. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Margaret turned back to face her. "I want to establish a scholarship fund. In your mother's name, Rose Brooks. For kids from underserved communities who want to attend private schools but can't afford them. Kids like Zoe who deserve every opportunity to shine." Diana's breath caught. "Margaret. I've already spoken to my financial advisor. The initial funding will come from the sale of my house, and I'll continue contributing annually. But more than that, I want to volunteer. I want to mentor these kids, help them navigate worlds that might not always welcome them, be the advocate I never was before." The gesture was so unexpected, so perfectly targeted to what mattered most, that Diana felt tears threaten. "Why?" "Because Zoe was right yesterday when she said scared people need extra love. I've been scared my whole life, scared of difference, scared of change, scared of losing the approval of people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered more than my own conscience." Margaret's voice grew steady with conviction. "But I'm tired of being scared. I want to spend whatever years I have left being useful." Diana wiped at her eyes, struck by the magnitude of what Margaret was offering. "You know this won't be easy. Working with these kids, their families, it's going to challenge everything you thought you knew about the world." "Good," Margaret said firmly. "I'm done with easy. Easy got me a beautiful house and a lonely life. I want messy and complicated and real." The intercom buzzed. "Chief Brooks? Your daughter is here. Should I send her up?" Diana and Margaret exchanged a look. "Send her up." Zoe bounded into the office, her backpack bouncing and her face bright with curiosity. She stopped short when she saw Margaret, uncertainty flickering across her features. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore," she said cautiously. "Hello, sweetheart." Margaret knelt down, bringing herself to Zoe's level just as she had the day before. "I brought your book back. And I brought you something else." She handed Zoe a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a basketball. "I had this made for you," Margaret said. "To remind you that you have every right to play wherever your heart leads you. And to remind me that the most beautiful things in life come when we're brave enough to let them in." Zoe threw her arms around Margaret's neck in an impulsive hug. "Does this mean we can be friends for real this time?" Margaret looked over Zoe's shoulder at Diana, who nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. Real friends. The kind who choose each other every day, especially when it's hard." 6 months later, Diana stood in the gymnasium of Westfield Academy, watching Margaret work with a group of scholarship recipients on their college application essays. The woman who had once called police on a child for playing basketball now spent her weekends coaching kids from across the city, helping them navigate the complex world of higher education. Zoe, now 12 and wearing her silver basketball charm every day, served as Margaret's unofficial assistant, her natural warmth helping newer students feel welcome. "You know," Diana said to Margaret during a break, "my mother would have loved this." Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her face into something radiant and real. "I hope I'm becoming someone she would have been proud to know." "You are," Diana said, meaning it completely. "You absolutely are." What does redemption look like to you? Have you ever seen someone make a complete transformation in how they see the world? Share your thoughts below. I believe we all have the capacity to choose love over fear, connection over comfort. Sometimes it just takes the right moment to show us who we're meant to be.
Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your love and support. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and stay tuned because more exciting stories are on the way. Until next time, take care and see you on the next story.